group. So maybe I just let Tord take over, and then we can have a discussion after. Let's discuss the film first.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, just to mention then that the film continues with some additional examples, and the important thing, I think, in relation to climate change is to make sure that this type of effect on people's work is really integrated into the analysis of the problems that many communities, particularly in tropical countries, will face. And let's see what people in this group want to bring up, ask questions about. You know, Bruno and I and Matthias Otto, who's also linked up now, have worked on this for many years. So of course the examples given in the film are just a few of those that we have come across.
Right. So do we have some comments from viewers? Not at the moment. Maybe that I could introduce Dr. Myri J. Myri, you still there? Who has done some work on heat in Auckland. Yeah, good. And maybe put your video, at least video yourself, Myri. Would be nice to see who you are.
I'm here. I'm
good.
Here.
That's great.
Okay.
This is not quite related to well, more generally related to work, but Myri has contacted all of Auckland's local boards, 20 plus, and offered a presentation on heat in their particular areas. And the reception has been extreme interest. And I have been with her to about 6 local boards. Tell us a little bit what stimulated you to do this and how you found the reception, Myri.
Thank you, Pat. I think what prompted me was the heat bomb over British Columbia in 2021. Some of you may remember there was a lot of media coverage of the fires in Western Canada, and there was a little town. Bear in mind that Western Canada is quite high north, higher north than New Zealand is south by a considerable degree, and the temperature there got up to in June, the last week of June in 2021, the temperature got up to 50 degrees and Celsius. And in that last week, there were over 600 deaths from heat. And so I was intrigued with this, and I followed up and went to the coroner's report, British Columbia coroner's report, and read about, why was so many deaths, what was the problem, and so on and so forth. They found that in that situation, a lot of the deaths were inside, not outside workers. And I found that intriguing. So they're a slightly different situation from Qatar and the tropics, but in some ways probably more like Auckland, where a lot of people will be indoors a lot of the time, and many of them won't have any cooling or anything. So what the British Columbia thing found was that over successive days, the houses built up, heat built up in the houses, and oftentimes the people that lived in the houses weren't actually aware of how hot it was and how dehydrated they were. So they just didn't do anything about it. Anyway, this got me really upset because I am of the physical age and constitution to be a sitting duck in that kind of situation. I do find the heat very difficult. I find heat in Auckland, by the time the temperature gets to 25 degrees, and if it's a humid, muggy day, that is difficult. So I thought there's heaps of people in Auckland, many of them, I happen to live on a ridge, so we get sea breezes both ways. But many parts of Auckland there's valleys and they little sort of bowls, dishes where the heat accumulates. And many will know there's a large population of low-income people in South Auckland and elsewhere, really. So I thought, what can I do? It's a really, next summer is going to be very dangerous for a lot of people. And the only thing so I wrote to the council and said, hey, I'd like to do a talk on this. And the councillors said, no, it's not our business. It's the hospital board. We're not interested in heat and heat deaths and stuff. So I thought, well, the hospital board's got a lot of other things to worry about and they're all stressed and so forth. So I'll write to the local government. That in Auckland, we've got 21 local councils. And for example, the Otara Papatoe Council is responsible for 86,000 people. And most of those people who live in that area are low income. And only 30% of them own their own house. They are renters. So a lot of other places, you get a similar proportion of people who, say, for example, in West Auckland. And I went to the local board because they have their contacts. They're in contact with the local RSA and the sports clubs and the brownies and girl guides and all that sort of stuff. And they also, in say the ethnically mixed communities, they have contacts with churches and so forth. So I thought they are probably going to be the people that might take this on and spread the information in the community. So we've been to, Pat and I have, and Jonathan, Pat and I have been to 6 local boards so far. Much to my surprise, they have been really interested. Their ears have been wagging and their eyes have been sparking and they've looked at me. So I think partly because they're sick of hearing about the local, a dispute about dogs or people worrying about boundaries or whatever. And something like heat is unusual to them. So we've had a lot of positive feedback from them.
Yes.
At this point, I've still got 3 more to do. So that'll bring it up to 9 out of the 21. I don't know if what the other people, what stopped them. I think, well, I got a reply from Waiheke Island saying, oh no, it's a hospital board thing, we're not interested. Well,
yeah.
So there we are.
Yes,
So
thank you.
that's my experience.
Thank you, Mari. So do we have any follow-up questions either to Mari or perhaps back to Tord? Yeah, Ruth.
Yes, please. Mari, so what is the outcome of all that work you've done?
They have asked, I've had several of them say, well, what can a local board do? And I've said, you know, through your collections with the local community, you should be putting it out there that it's something to worry about and get yourself prepared. And I had the PowerPoint and I had a pamphlet that says what you need to do with heat.
I think one of the good things that Mari suggested they do is that they have cooling places and that these be signed up. For instance, those suburbs that have libraries, then a library should be a place where people can go to be cool. And if there was a local community hall, then people should know that if their house is really hot,
Yes.
yeah, then I mean it takes time for trees to grow, and we need to plant them. But Ruth, you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, Mari, I found that very interesting from a couple of points of view. One is that in France in 2003, and I was there at that time, there was I think 1,500 people died in Paris from the heat. Most of them were indoors, most of them were alone, and most of them were in houses that were not cooled. And so after that, you could not sell a house unless you had provided a heat map to show where all the weaknesses were in the walls, etc. Now, we're about to see a Labour government be decimated at the polls, and they have done lots of things around housing. They didn't do anything in their Healthy Homes standards to ensure that when you sold a house, that you proved that there was no, I just want to add that this is the only way, Mari, not just to go to each of the different district health boards. They're all collapsing anyway under a centralized system. You need a government policy that actually protects people when they buy a house, that the standards have been met. And I feel strongly about that. But I think the point that Tord Kjellstrom was making, it's not just New Zealand we're worried about. It's the huge countries elsewhere in India, Indonesia, some of the Nigeria, the African countries, the South American countries. They are suffering in billions of people. And so it's all very well for us to look after our houses and everything. What we have to do is really think in a much higher level about how to insist that New Zealand plays a bigger role internationally in terms of their contribution to the climate crisis.
Thanks, Ruth. We have, well, Bruno, do you want to follow up? I saw your hand up.
Yes, I'd like to follow up what Ruth said. I'll just share my screen, if I can. Now, this is Climate Chip. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Yep. So you get to it by going to climatechip.org, and then you go to this area called your area, and you've got three options. Your area today, which looks a bit like this for Auckland, and it's effectively the current temperature from something similar to weather stations. Each of these grid cells is measured in terms of temperature, and most of the temperature in these grid cells is determined by nearby weather stations. And Matthias can say a lot more about this, but it's worthwhile exploring. And you've even got weather station data there. I don't want to go into that at this stage. I want to go more into tomorrow, which is the future. And again, I've focused on Auckland. And here you see the monthly profile of the maximum temperature. And you see that the maximum, the hottest month is going to be in February. And then we can go here, we can go to February, and we can see how that changes with time. So this is in 1990. These are the two scenarios, the one that where we control the heating to about 1 degree. the global temperature, and here is the one where we keep on going as we are, more or less. So all this is available. You can search yourself, you can do what you like with this. So much stuff in here. And we'll also put the video somewhere on this menu bar so you can watch it. But what I want to show you in particular, following up with what Ruth said, is to look at, when I can get it right, is to go to, oh, it's up here, the heat tool. Now, the heat tool's the latest innovation we've had on this, and the heat tool tells us how many unsafe work days there are per year. And you see in Auckland, there's not many unsafe work days. And this is doing heavy work. Moderate work, there's even less than 1 day. And of course, if you do light work, then there's even less still. So you see, and in fact, there's no issue at all. So you see, one of the key issues, and this is where we differ from what Mari's saying, what Ruth is saying, is that here we're talking about workers. Workers generate the heat inside their body. Older people, as Mari was saying, have difficulty controlling the heat from the outside. We're specifically focused on probably young middle-aged workers who have got good sort of temperature control, but they're not able to cool down and cool the heat that they're developing from the work they're doing.
I've only got a little bit left, but
Are you having the glass there?
oh yes, thank you.
Well, Paul,
Now, one of the key things with that,
Come
one of the key things with that is that humidity is critical. Once the temperature gets above, this is for workers, when the temperature gets above a certain degree, say 35 degrees, 36 degrees, the only way we can lose heat is by evaporation of sweat on the skin. And I saw some of this coming up in the chat. If we aren't able to evaporate our perspiration, in other words, the humidity is high, then workers are in real trouble. So this is Auckland. Now, people might say, well, what's the issue? Why do we worry about it in Auckland? I mean, there's 1 day in the year in February where there's an issue. Well, this is the same argument as you have with plastics. Why do New Zealanders bother about not using plastic and not throwing plastic away? We're such a small country, it's not going to make any difference. If you go from New Zealand, from Auckland, for example, where the issue isn't very great, to a place over here, well, actually, I'll just type it up here, Singapore. Then bingo, Singapore. And you can see for Singapore, once you get to heavy work in the year 2100, every single day of the year, it is unsafe to work at certain times of the day. And that's where the issue lies. It's not with New Zealand, it's with the tropical, with the hot countries, often with the poorer countries, Singapore, of course, being the exception. The issue is that we produce greenhouse gases, and these people, not so much in Singapore, but sort of neighboring countries, don't produce greenhouse gases. And we're effectively poisoning the atmosphere with the greenhouse gases and making these people suffer. So we have to play our part in reducing greenhouse gases. Anyway, that's my little summary, and I'm with Pat. Let's go for the Greens. Let's make sure that there's some decent legislation that will cut New Zealand greenhouse gas emissions rather than possibly increasing them. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruno. If you could please take back your shared screen so we can.
I will.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that Paul, you had something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the Met Office did do a study on Canterbury of extreme temperatures in the northwesterlies with the foehn effect, and it's usually followed by a cooler southwest change, but sometimes the northwesterlies can last for 4 or 5 days, and you know that both inside and outside the house will be very hot, but it's usually fairly dry, so it's different from Auckland. You know, lower humidity is you can cope with it better, but the temperatures, you know, have been up to mid 40s in South Canterbury in the recent decades, and we're likely to get, you know, even hotter temperatures for short periods. But it's a sudden, you know, we're getting 2 or 3 days of those sorts of temperatures will be a real challenge for everybody in Canterbury, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and as Ruth has just pointed out in the chat, there's a wonderful phrase which describes what Bruno was describing about the effect of humidity, and it's the wet bulb effect. So, so poignantly described in Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry of the Future. People might have heard him talk. He was interviewed with Kim Hill on Saturday. Thanks, Ruth, for alerting me to that. But wet bulb is quite terrifying because Mairi, in her presentation, has a wonderful chart which shows that an ordinary 27 degrees temperature becomes progressively, its effects are the same as progressively hotter temperatures as the humidity rises, so that 27 with no humidity is quite easy, as perhaps they get in Canterbury, as Paul has described. But up in Auckland, if we had 80 or 90% humidity, then 27 is in the 30s already. And that is the thing which I find quite terrifying to think of, really. And it's a very interesting, we probably can't show us, but it's a very interesting graph. And so even 25 with 80, 90% humidity is equivalent to nearly 30 or something. And for Auckland, that's what we have to, and other places, of course, be aware of. All right, well, how are people going? Do we have some more comments, more discussion?
Yeah, Tord has his hand up.
Oh, Tord, sorry, Tord, I missed you. Yes, I see it. Did you have your... Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment in relation to protecting, of course, our own climate and protecting people from heat in Auckland and Christchurch. The main, let's say, action that reduces the climate change and the heating in our own communities is, of course, what is happening in China and India, United States, Japan, Nigeria, Brazil, Indonesia, etc. So we should not ignore the possibilities that exist for us to carry out research and analysis of the type that Bruno and Matthias and our other colleagues, Chris and Dave, in Mapua have been doing over the last few years. And it's quite surprising now that the Health Research Council has a new initiative on climate change and health research. They have not contacted me or anyone in our group about this. They have not contacted Alistair Woodward, one of the most experienced people in New Zealand in this field. And I think if any of you have a possibility to influence the staff in the Health Research Council to broaden the discussion about what research should be done to protect the New Zealand climate and all our communities, Maoris, as well as everyone else, of course, I think that would be very important, because I'm extremely surprised that they have totally ignored the 130 reports and papers that Bruno and Matthias and I have published in the last 10 years. And Alistair Woodward has probably published about the same number. It's incredible that they haven't contacted us. Anyway, that's the comment for anyone who can influence them. Thank you.
Thank you, Tord. That is extraordinary, isn't it? those with the knowledge are ignored. Well, that's kind of classic for the whole of climate, isn't it? But thank you for that comment. Gavin, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I just can't resist commenting. I've got nothing helpful to say here, but the film just brings to sort of screaming evidence the two themes. One is the climate change that we're all worried about, and the other is the economic structure that I think we are probably all equally worried about, because the ruthlessness of the basically export industries in those countries that we've seen so far illustrated is just appalling. It's a whole corporate problem, and it's only mitigation of the fact that things are getting hotter. But I think it's cruel on all these people, the way they are forced to take on what are simply bad jobs.
Indeed, and it's the power of the corporates, isn't it? Where so long as workers are replaceable, then they are meaningless. They just need to be turned over like cogs in a wheel. Yeah, so thanks for that. I'm just flicking through to make sure I've not missed anybody else's hand up. Yeah. Well, I think maybe we take a couple of things away from here. One is Tord's comment about the amount of research that he and others at Mapua and at their team have accumulated, which could be of use very much to climate planning in New Zealand. Do you not have any contacts, Tord, with anybody on the Climate Commission who are tasked with providing information to the government?
I have, during the last 2 years, written numerous emails, had phone conversations,
Right.
and have even met various people. And I don't know if it's ageism, I'm 80 years old. So maybe they just think, well, that old fogey, what the hell does he know, It's an interesting situation because yes, of course, we need to deal with our own greenhouse gas emissions and take actions locally to reduce our emissions. But in fact, if we, through research and other activism, if you can call it that, can influence what is going to happen in India during the next 10 years in terms of their production of electricity and using renewables instead of fossil fuels, I mean, that will protect New Zealand climate and New Zealand health even better than whatever we can do here at home.
Interesting, isn't it? But how much work there is to do and how widely spread we are. But then again, it's nice to come back to Mairi and how we can, our own little bit also in our communities. Did you have a comment, Mairi? Yeah. Unmute yourself, please.
Yes. I agree with you, Tord, absolutely. That's strategically where we should be working at. But my own personal thing is I'm tempted to give up in despair. And because as you say, there is a certain degree of ageism, and there's also a certain degree of misogyny and so forth. And I found, for me, just doing something local seemed to be my little way of protesting against the corporate steamroller that we're all up against. But I do agree that really, unless China and India make substantial changes to their energy policies, we're stuffed.
Indeed, I'm sure that's right. That is the hardest thing, really, is not to give in to those feelings. But to do at our own individual level here, and then look when we need it, the information that Tord has, we can fire off to places like the Climate Commission and say, why aren't you using this information?
In fact, I was thinking maybe if it wasn't just Tord writing to the Climate Commission, but all of us saying, hey, come on, get on with it.
Well, yeah, thanks, Myri. Okay, are we going to then call it a day for this evening? Any last minute comments? Any questions? Another dumb question on the chat. Who this is from? Okay, let's have a look. How much is war worsening the problem? How much is war? Yes, indeed. Wars plural, and the latest one. America supporting America's arms industry will be very busy coping with the very latest one in Israel, of course, but let's not. Catherine, you have a comment.
Kia ora. I'm just wondering, with all the comments that are coming down now, the one on ageism doesn't wash well with me. Basically, from the point of view that nobody knows your age when you put into a submission, what submissions are being made by this organisation to the government and to MBIE? What submissions are being made, or is it just a lot of? Sorry, I don't know the organisation well. I was recommended to listen to this webinar, which I really was keen to do. Unfortunately, the video wasn't what I tuned in for. But what sort of submissions are people making? Or are they going round in a circle and chasing their tails?
Thank you. You're right about submissions. Unless somebody actually gets onto Google and looks up who is making them, which I'm sure they haven't got time for, then they ought to be anonymous. So I don't know, Tord, how you can answer that. But
well, I will put together some of the ideas that I have raised with the Climate Change Commission, with the Health Research Council, with the Minister for Climate Change, with my own Member of Parliament, and with others. And I'll send it to Pat, and she might share it with you, and anyone who feels that it's worth pushing for some change, I'll be very happy, of course. But and by the way, I should point out that Bruno and Matthias and Chris and Dave and myself in our research team, we are not looking for money for our research. We have been so lucky. We've been funded from external, outside of New Zealand sources, European Union, Wellcome Trust, Swedish universities, etc., etc. So we have never needed to ask for funding in New Zealand. So that's not why I raised the issue. I just think that it's the strategic issue of what analysis and what research might possibly influence the government in India, China, Nigeria, etc. That is one aspect of what we need to do. And of course, Mary is right. We should also work locally with local communities. Yes, I agree with that. But our research efforts and the results of such efforts and publications, etc., may in fact have some impact at these big countries or in these big countries, and that would make a big difference to our own climate.
Yes, of course. Perhaps you make a point about the reduced productivity of workers in heat, and that is, of course, economics. When that has effect, then maybe things will change. The power of money again. Right. Who else do we have a comment from? Right. Okay. Well, we're very nearly up to time. So I think I shall just say thank you to Tord and Bruno for fronting up and apologize for the technology problems. Oh, Gavin, you have another thing to say? Is your hand up? Or was it there before?
That's just reinforcing your thank you to Tord and Bruno.
Right, that's good. And I do hope that if you do go to Climate Chip and have a look at the film, then you will see it as I enjoyed it, which was why I recommend it for here. Robin, you have a hand up. No? Robin hasn't a hand up. Okay, all right. All right, well, I think that I wish everybody well for Saturday, and may we all achieve what we hoped for. Who knows? It was a nice positive poll, wasn't there, earlier? So see you at the next webinar. Thanks for your support. Thanks, Tord and Bruno. Okay.